It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure that you can catch at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. It's been a little bit since we've had a Ray Harryhausen flick, so let's go to one of his most famous monster creations. This week, I'm going to look at 1957's 20 Million Miles to Earth. This movie was right in the glut of monster movie sci-fi flicks of the second half of the 50s. Part of this might have something to do with the atomic age having begun and featuring heavily in the movies post the bombs that ended World War II. Harryhausen's career in feature films was launched into the stratosphere with 1949's Mighty Joe Young. He followed that up 4 years later with The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. The latter started a relationship with Harryhausen and Columbia Pictures that then turned into a decade-long partnership. Some of those films were directed by 20 Million Miles to Earth director Nathan Juran. One was produced by Sam Katzman, but all the rest during Harryhausen's Columbia years, and really for the rest of his career, were either produced or co-produced by Charles H. Schneer. The creature that was brought back in its egg from Venus in this movie is called a Ymir. Basically, if you've ever seen a still or a picture or art of a bipedal monster with a tail and a reptilian face, then you've probably seen the Ymir. He's about 25 feet tall, maybe a little bit taller at his fullest height in this movie. But Harryhausen was a master of stop motion. He was inspired by King Kong, which he saw many times over as a teenager. When he was an adult, he got to work under his idol, who created King Kong, Willis O'Brien, during the production of Mighty Joe Young. Proving himself as fully capable, he was then able to branch out on his own and worked on that string of Columbia Pictures releases from 1953 until 1977. All of his films, except for Earth vs. the Flying Saucers, which was Katzman produced, like I said, were either produced or co-produced with Schneer. Actually, toward the later part of his career, Schneer and Harryhausen had kind of a production company of their own. Only 3 of his films were distributed by a company other than Columbia. So talk about hooking up with a company that wants to work with you for pretty much your entire career. Harryhausen's final film was 1981's Clash of the Titans, which I covered many moons ago on this show, but because of the new special effects technologies that were fast catching up with stop motion and the advances that Industrial Light and Magic had with the Star Wars films, studios were no longer really interested in the effects that Harryhausen and Schneer's productions would have. So they both decided to retire. However, Harryhausen remained friendly with many and even did a little bit part acting in movies. Harryhausen died in 2013, having never once been nominated for a competitive Academy Award. However, many of the filmmakers who he inspired with his work successfully lobbied the Academy to grant him the Gordon E. Sawyer Lifetime Achievement Award in 1992. Director Nathan Juran was an Academy Award winner for Best Art Direction for 1942's How Green Was My Valley. And he actually ultimately ended up directing a lot of monster films, with one in particular I've covered in the past on Monster Mondays, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. Now, the star of 20 Million Miles to Earth is William Hopper. Now, despite having been an actor since the 30s, Hopper is best known for being Paul Drake on Perry Mason for 9 seasons. However, he was in some fairly big-time movies in the mid-50s before becoming Drake. He was in this movie and The Deadly Mantis as the lead, or the second lead. So he was the lead in this one and second lead in Deadly Mantis. Now, both films were directed by Juran. However, he had 2 fatherly roles in quite significant films. He was Natalie Wood's father in Rebel Without a Cause, in which he was a kind of stern and emotionally distant man. The other film featured him as an absentee father, The Bad Seed, which launched the career of Patty McCormick. Sadly, Hopper passed away in 1970 at a relatively youthful age of 55, but he was a chain smoker, and that led to other issues that included a stroke and pneumonia, which ultimately was what he actually passed from 3 weeks after his stroke. But let's dig into 20 Million Miles to Earth. As was the norm when movies of this time came out, we get a little narration about human advancement. Of course, the big advancement that's kind of featured was the atomic bomb, which kind of means that our main achievement of that era was also quite murderous. But that also means that man was now able to go 20 million miles from Earth to Venus and back again. However, the XY-21, a ship capable of going to Venus and back, it's seen at the beginning of the movie crashing into the Mediterranean Sea. One thing that I do like about this movie, if I'm able to kind of say this here, you don't actually have those scenes of a ship on an alien planet like Venus. There's no action on Venus. We are actually getting the story from after this mission, which a lot of smaller movies and a lot more, I would almost call sci-fi exploitation of the time, would have spent a lot of time actually right there on Venus, showing weird monsters, different sets and stuff like that. Not here. We're getting the whole story after the XY-21 mission. Now, some Sicilian fishermen are able to save 2 astronauts from the ship before it completely sinks. However, they also spotted that the ship had a hole in it, and that's because it was struck by an asteroid on its way back to Earth. Now, United States science and military guys get the good news that lead astronaut Robert Calder, played by Hopper, and the XY-21 were found. But while the ship was not salvageable, Calder was. And while Major General McIntosh flies to Italy to retrieve his men and resources, a small boy on the beach where the locals are looking over Calder finds a small capsule with a gelatinous thing inside it, almost like an egg. The boy opens the container and wraps the gooey thing up in his jacket and takes it to a zoologist to take a look at it. One look at the gelatinous egg thing and the zoologist knows that something is not quite right. When Calder wakes up, he realizes that the other recovered crewman, Dr. Sharman, has a condition that looks almost like barnacles on his face. And Calder said that 8 other crewmen died from this exact same condition. Sharman is very worried about the specimen that they were carrying with them, and before he dies, he asks Calder to make sure that he finds whatever the specimen is. Back at the zoologist's trailer, the gelatinous egg has hatched, and the little alien fella comes out and sneaks around. Now, he's sensitive to light, it seems at first, but he doesn't really look terribly threatening. However, he grows about 3 times his original size overnight, and the zoologist is excited to take the creature on the road to show it off. Now, after Calder is collected by General McIntosh, the Italian authorities are told of the mission of the ship and the flight to Venus. McIntosh also tells about how Venus wasn't kind to the human crew. The deadly disease occurred after members of the crew were inflicted by the atmosphere and conditions of the Venusian atmosphere. And even though the Americans thought that they had foolproof respiratory equipment, it didn't save them. And I like that this movie kind of correctly predicts that a manned mission to Venus would be almost impossible, and probably certainly would be impossible for with any of the equipment that we have today as far as astronauts wearing suits to be able to survive there. Now soon, McIntosh and Calder realize that the Leonardos, Marisa and her grandfather, the zoologist, has the creature because of the little boy, because of that little boy who took what they were looking for to that zoologist, Dr. Leonardo. Now, the Leonardos have another issue on their hands. The Ymir is even larger, and he can now escape from the cage that they put him in. Not only does he escape, but he takes off, and they don't really know where he's going. Eventually, the military catch up to the Leonardos, and Marisa mentions that the Ymir's claw was very hot to the touch. Now, the Ymir goes into a barn to find food, and he scares off the chickens and horses and finds some grain to eat. However, when he wounds the farmer's dog in a pretty bad way, well, we kind of realize that maybe this monster ain't such a good guy. Though I'd kind of argue that what do you expect this creature that got attacked by the dog do but defend itself? But anyway, the Americans come to capture the creature, and Calder mentions that the Ymir aren't ferocious animals unless they're provoked. Calder attempts to wrangle the creature to recapture it, but everyone kind of screws it up for him, and he's forced to basically try to beat the creature up with a shovel to save the farmer from being killed by it. The creature takes off again, and the trail goes cold for the night. Considering all the shenanigans at the farm, the Italian government no longer really wants to aid the Americans in capturing the Ymir alive. Instead, they want the creature dead before it can hurt anyone else, or worse, kill someone. So Calder convinces them to give him one more chance. He knows that if they give him an electrical shock, that creature will be paralyzed and should give the Americans time to capture it and put it away someplace and keep it sedated. Using the creature's favorite food, sulfur, to lure it, they are able to drop a metal net over the creature and electrify it to knock it out. With the creature now in the zoo being held for study, the American military does something kind of surprising and tells the press about what's going on, about the flight to Venus and the monster they brought back. Calder takes a few members of the press to see the monster and ask some questions of the various scientists collected. However, the Ymir has grown even more, but he's being kept sedated. Unfortunately, an accident in the lab knocks out the electricity, keeping the Ymir asleep, and when the power can't be turned back on, the creature escapes. The first thing it does is bust into an elephant's enclosure and, feeling threatened, decides to beat the elephant up. The fight between the Ymir and the elephant spills out into the zoo and soon into the city of Rome. Eventually, the Ymir overpowers the elephant and is soon going around town, picking guys up and tossing them around and causing general havoc, as a giant monster should. Calder and the rest of the military confront the creature in the ruins of Rome, and they are able to combine a perfectly aimed bazooka and some tank shellings to ultimately cause the creature to fall off the ruins and plunge to its death. Now let's get to the three things that I like about 20 Million Miles to Earth. First up, I like the early scenes in Sicily. First of all, there's this kind of attempt at an authentic feel to the people in this area, their accents, the area, so forth. I do have to admit that I'm not sure if some of these actors are possibly made up to look a little more olive skin than they really are, but it doesn't feel like a cheap American version of a European setting. In fact, this whole movie takes place in Italy. And what's more is there's legitimate time given to the mystery of this specimen in the gelatinous egg thing and a deadly disease that wiped everyone but Calder out on the XY-21 mission. It's actually taking time to build that little mystery and tension, and that's always appreciated. Speaking of the Italian locals, I want to give a special shout out to little Pepe, the little boy who found the Ymir egg and kind of created this whole mess. There's something a little more pernicious about Pepe. He took the egg because he knew he could sell it so he could buy a cowboy hat like he sees in the American Western movies. So his only purpose to take the egg was for his own gang. And he sells the specimen to Dr. Leonardo for 200 lira so he can buy that cowboy hat. However, when he realizes the Americans are looking for the specimen too and are willing to give a reward for his return, he steps right up, to collect the 500,000 lira being offered. So he has now taken 2 different people or groups for a bunch of money, and he has big plans for that money. First, he got his cowboy hat. Then he was able to get a horse to ride like a cowboy. It's kind of great. The kid isn't doing the altruistic thing. He's doing all this for himself, and you don't always see that in these types of movies from this era without the kid learning some sort of a lesson from it. This is pretty good screenwriting to create this much more realistic and mischievous character. Thirdly, the Ymir creature is fantastic. I love when he first hatches. He's kind of cute and almost coos like a bird. He's also frightened by his surroundings. Marisa calls it ugly, and I have to admit, I took a little offense to that. The little guy wasn't causing any problems, but anyway, the design is something both alien but also somewhat recognizable. The reptilian skin and tail, the human-like shape of the bipedal body part, the face of something kind of like an old Chinese mythical dragon-like creature or a sea creature. It's a wonderful design, and you can find him sort of cute and cuddly when he's newly hatched, but he could also be seen as something terrifying when he's fully grown. I love how human his movements are. He hides his eyes from the light. He rubs his eyes once he kind of adjusts to it. He reacts in a sort of frightened and defensive manner when the zoologist wants to pick him up. You can tell that Harryhausen learned this from O'Brien's very human-like Kong figure work that he did for that 1933 King Kong. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com, as well as new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday morning. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers. And you can also subscribe to us on YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. Next time, I'm going to take us back to the early 30s and director Todd Browning and his phenomenally theme-filled classic that is often called horror, though it truly kind of isn't. I'm going to talk about 1932's Freaks. But until next week, stay spooky.